Hi, thanks everyone for being here on this short breakout session at the very end. I know everyone is getting tired. We are going to talk about restricted environments, particularly the most restricted environment in IT I ever had the displeasure to work with, Java cards. So we're going to create zero-knowledge proofs on Java cards. My research mostly goes to post-quantum cryptography. This is gonna have a little echo throughout the talk here, which will justify my main tool for generating the proofs themselves. So on the agenda, I'm gonna justify why I used a post-quantum primitive for such a thing. Why did I do the Java card-based implementation? Then the basic protocol, which is kind of an old protocol that I implemented in a more optimized ways, better parameters and such, entity tricks. Then we're going to generalize the same protocol into circuits, because this event is more about general purpose applications of zero knowledge. So I was very glad to hear that I'm not the only one covering mobile provers today. We already had mobile SDKs and identity too, actually, in this room, that many times referred that chip cards would be potentially a good way to do zero-knowledge voting and ID. And I'm glad to present a practical implementation of such thing here. So the current state of ZK is sadly enjoying this kind of reputation. Node modules became the new prover system. Peel requires 500 gigs to generate the proofs, and it's slowly starting to centralize all the use cases. I'm not saying that layer 2 sequencers are inherently bad because of that, just reminding everyone that we have plethora of use cases for zero knowledge besides blockchain scaling. So the scheme itself will be implemented on lattices. As I said, my research is mostly in post-quantum, either using lattices or non-abelian groups. My choice here on lattices is not because of the post-quantum security. I'm not trying to reignite that religious war here. They are just super simple to operate with. I prefer them to hash-based or especially elliptic curve-based or pairing-based instantiations, because group operations on Prime are just expensive, especially on restricted environment when you don't even have an SDK to do such stuff. So they produce now small proofs. Lattices enjoyed a bad reputation that at the beginning with textbook learning with errors, they produced hundreds of megabytes of proofs and key sizes, and then we slowly started to shrink down. And you're going to see where is the situation now regarding that. So Java cards, the pros is that it's a $2 trusted execution environment. So you can pack all your use cases that currently are instantiated on Intel because of SGX and private coin stuff that you need to hide from the user. You can do it with this. They are arguably more secure than the ledgers, if you believe the common criteria certification process, which is not inherently worse than what's happening in the dungeon, but some voting and government ID solution do believe in the strength of the stamps, and these cards are a level higher certified than the ledgers currently, so they resist side channel attacks and such against key exposure much more. They are super easy to carry, like it's a voting application, passively powered, no batteries and stuff. The downside is that they are very outdated technologies. So the last version of a Java card that you can get on your hands on even B2B, in a B2B setup, is at least 2 versions outdated to what's the actual Java card operating system is right now. Nobody ever manufactured anything above JCOP 3, even though now we are done with JCOP 4 and doing 4 point something right now. But it's just not available on the market. Another downside is that This is the largest card that you can get your hands on, the JCOP G3H145, that you can get your hands on as a natural person. Anything above this will require some form of KYC. For example, I have a cryptographic consulting company, tried to apply for at Motechno for a more powerful card, and they rejected me because I'm not in finance or governance. So this is the best that we can operate, and then this is the only type of Java card that I tested the code on. So prior work on this, statistical zero-knowledge ID with lattices on Java cards is not a new thing. This is actually the preferred way to do zero-knowledge on Java cards, because that's the only thing it can manage on a hardware level. Problem is that the parameter selection is kind of outdated. Lots of things happened since the original publication, especially with ring instantiations of worst-case problems on lattices. The implementation itself is lost, so not only what is described in the paper are kind of suboptimal, but the links doesn't point anywhere, and I didn't manage to recover it on Wayback Machine either. And also the original paper doesn't generalize the circuits. I made some hacks to do that, so take my logic how I generalize this identity protocol with a grain of salt, because it's gonna be a hack, but is generalized at the end. So you can find the link there. The properties of my implementation is that, yeah, it runs on 30 megahertz and 11 kilobytes of RAM. We have available 145 kilobytes of ROM. The proofs that I generate are 300 bytes from the card, and they're generated on the card. The threat model is statistical zero-knowledge, because one really good advantage of lattices, beside the quantum, beside the short parameter sizes, is that if you do your distributions on the Gaussians right, then the statistical closeness to worst-case gap SVP is much more easy to reason about than anything in pairing-based instantiations. So it's kind of easy to read statistical zero-knowledge threat model here. And yeah, the implementation also can generalize to circuits, as I'm going to show shortly. So the original protocol from 2013 that I also linked at the beginning takes a random vector. So this is not your identity vector. I'm actually assuming so your identities in this voting use case are 16 bytes. So 128-bit security is the assumption here. Random byte, then we pad the remaining bytes of a ring sys hash. It's a post-quantum way of hashing, instantiated on polynomial rings. So 16 bytes unique random string padded with a small vector, as in the terminology of lattice cryptography, that the coefficients behave in a discrete Gaussian. And we see that the challenge basically ring learning with errors encryption to the prover, which he has to prove that is able to decrypt, XOR it with the commitment. So we make a commitment with the ring sys. The challenge is a ring learning with error encryption. Super simple. We have to abort, of course, to actually reach the zero knowledge property if the ciphertext that we received is not valid, so it's not in the domain of ring learning with errors. This is important, of course. And then we really reveal the original commitment. So it's a commit and argue protocol, and your argument is opening the RLVE ciphertext. This is not anything new so far from the 2013 paper. The parameters selected for the commitment scheme is shown above for the shortest integer solution problem and the ring learning with errors problem. We see that both fit into 16 bytes, so you can utilize the short types on Java, provide 128-bit security, plenty. The commitment size is 320 bytes, so slightly over 1 APDU length, because the protocol you talk with Java cards on are kind of a very primitive and dumb protocol. You can't even use every byte in a frame. that comes in an APDU. The maximum length is 256, so you have to make 2 round trips for the commitments, which is actually the majority of the overhead in the whole implementation. So communicating the commitments and the ciphertext are the main bottleneck here. So observation 1, if you're familiar with cyclic lattices, they are really easy to store in the learning with errors problem, because if you just rotate the coefficients around in a matrix and take a negacyclic form with it, then you can span the whole lattice with a single vector. With this parameter, it not only provides you 128-bit security, but you don't even have to store the roots of unity when you do the entity transform to fastly or super efficiently multiply vectors together. So originally you should have been able to get some performance gains from storing all the roots of unity prior, but turns out if you benchmark it on a Java card, because it's so restricted, it's actually easier to get the new negacyclic rotation of the already stored vector than to read from ROM. So this is observation 1 here, which is gonna give a huge speed up on the original protocol. 2 is that even though the parameters for the 2 worst case lattice problems are very different, the prover, the card, never sends out the ring learning with errors ciphertext. So if we live with the assumption that the challenge it receives is already in entity transferred form, then we can synchronously decrypt as the APDU arrives. And the third one, this is actually the most important observation when we reach circuit generalization, is that the encryption scheme for the ring learning with error problem that I and the original paper instantiated is the Linder-Packard encryption, which is additively homomorphic up to half of the modulus that we selected for the quotient ring. This is important later. So in the beginning, I had this meme on layer 2 provers and stuff, and then I showed an identification protocol for a special use case. It wasn't really a fair comparison, so now we're gonna bridge the gap and mold this identification protocol into something that's able to prove circuits too. So we know that the basic technique to do that is kind of old school now, with all the polynomial techniques presented, for example, today. But I'm gonna use the LPCP version, a linear PCP generalization. We know that for every rank 1 constraint system there exists 4-query PCP. If you do QSP instead of rank 1, then you can manage it in 3 queries. But we also know that the only way we can generalize an LPCP into a general purpose snark is that we need a strictly linear PCP. Reminder that a strictly linear PCP is when an adversary can only craft a valid ciphertext using the homomorphic additively homomorphic encryption scheme that we use. The only way for you to make a new ciphertext is to make a linear combination of ciphertext you already observed. And this is a problem with us because we use the public key encryption scheme. So you can always take a new, you can always encrypt a random byte vector to the public key and generate a ciphertext that you never seen before. So your encryption scheme is affine at best because you have a translation at the very end that you've never seen. Some common techniques how to overcome this big problem is either, especially in lattices, so extensions fields didn't really work out because they very quickly blow up the parameter sizes that I selected to fit into the smart card to levels that the caplet doesn't even fit on the card when compiled. Then another more common way is to transform your encryption scheme into secret key version. That's kind of the trivial and the most popular form. How do you do LPCP-based ZK circuits? But that also didn't work first because I really emphasized using the original DJ13 protocol because of the small parameter sizes, the asynchronous decryption. which is inherently public key. And they all resulted in proof sizes that are not really interesting here. Results on the techniques on the paper below. So I had to restrict the security assumption here, which turns out that you can do. Details on the paper below, why is it true here? So remember observation 3, that we have an additively homomorphic encryption scheme up to a level of error. We don't care about bootstrapping or leveling here, because the use case allows us to stay within the boundaries of this error vector. So the trapdoor function, in this case, ring learning with errors, have to only remain affine. That works with our encryption scheme. Only slightly increases the verifier cost. That's not in my threat model, that's the verifier's computational cost. I'm only caring about the proving. That has to happen on the smart card. Verifier can be a regular phone or a laptop that does this. And of course, the most important part of this is that I can reuse my original encryption scheme for the rest of the transform here. So a strictly affine PCP, we know that can not super efficiently, but can be transformed into a general purpose ZK snark. It makes it non-interactive and succinct if you instantiate it usually through pairings, which we're gonna gap right now. The last step, so we have Linder-Packard ring learning with error encryption, ring sys commitment schemes, which we converted into a strictly affine PCP on the card. Then we need to mask these vectors in a post-quantum secure way, so I can't just do pairings on these ciphertext that I just received on the card first, because I need to represent the grouped up elements. So I need something within the same group. Turns out there is a plethora of literature on ZK or lattice equivalent masking to pairing problems. This is the one I selected for the parameter sizes that are optimal for my implementation and can still fit into the card. And then you use the proposed protocol that I made the sequence diagram for. So it's composed of these steps, rank 1 constraint system to the strictly affine protocol, and then you select your weapon of choice when you do the lattice-based wrapping again, hopefully with the same group or the same parameters that I use here to replace pairing here. This results if you take the latest circum examples from the repository, re-instantiated on Poseidon pre-images of 16 bytes, which is exactly our security claim, fit into less than 60 kilobytes, and we have roughly 3 times that on ROM on the card, so the circuit can be easily stored. Of course, for more complex circuits, this very quickly blows up way above to the megabytes, which are not capable to store on smart cards, but I brought identification and voting use cases, which you can abuse using just Poseidon pre-images. So demo time. This, the building process runs JCard Sim, a Java card simulator, as unit testing, and we see that that's the whole proof. So that's the whole communication happening between the card, and we see that verification succeeded in JCard Sim. I'm gonna go back for everyone to be able to get the GitHub link. So the main takeaways here. Lattice-based crypto really did enjoy a bad reputation on key sizes, proof sizes, and ZK. We did reach, though, the level when it's with abuse of terminology and some techniques, it's arguably more efficient than pairing-based stuff, especially in restricted environment. That has been covered not just by me today. So up to the point when it takes like roughly 6 seconds to generate a proof on 30 megahertz. kind of acceptable. And for very basic circuits, it only takes up roughly half of the storage available on a modern smart card for you. One last observation that I still didn't explore, and two things that the implementation won't contain. The interesting part, because this might yield even more efficiency in the whole protocol, the additive homomorphism used in the SAPCP generalization for circuits could potentially benefit from modulus switching. So when you additively add together ring learning with errors ciphertext, at the very last step you can transform that ciphertext into another quotient polynomial ring that takes much less space. And this I didn't implement and has never been tested, so we can potentially, after the circuit generalization, which obviously blows up the original protocol, we can go back to the original quotient group size. Second stuff that the implementation doesn't cover, I'm using continuous Gaussians for the secret key generation, and I round it to the nearest integer. And we know that that kind of breaks statistical ZK. We don't know any attack against this type of key generation, but statistical ZK only holds if your Gaussian generation is truly a discrete Gaussian generation with rejection sampling or something else. So for efficiency purposes, I used continuous Java SDK Gaussian generator and rounded it to the next integer, but it shouldn't really affect performance that much. It does affect, though, statistical security. Thanks for the attention. I'm gonna go back to the GitHub link for everyone to access. And yeah, share observations, maybe even the rejection sampling key generation in code. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Do we have any questions?
What assumptions are you making about the ballot, or are you not making any assumption? It's a free format.
Come again, like?
Ballot? You're voting, right? It's a voting protocol, no?
Yeah, well, I didn't really get...
assumptions, what's the format of the ballot?
Of the what?
Of the ballot. Like the choices who you're voting for. This scheme can be generalized. It's not necessarily just for voting.
Sorry, I don't really get the voting use case, yes?
How is the vote expressed? What's the format of the vote?
That I really didn't get into, but identity protocols do induce voting protocols too, because that's the main problem that you have to overcome here.
This scheme, sorry, because I think this is that's why this scheme is not necessarily, well, can be generalized, but it's not necessarily just applied for a voting scheme. So I don't think you made any assumption on it.
So there are no assumptions?
No, so this is just a generalization on how you can run like ZK proofs.
But that's the...
Smartcard, which could potentially be used for voting.
I kind of, yeah. Thanks for the help, though. Yeah, I kind of starting to get the question. I don't have any assumptions on the form of voting, yes. Any assumption, but that's kind of the main takeaway. So identity protocols do yield efficient voting protocols, and if your assumption doesn't fit into that, then in very worst case, which does blow up proof sizes, communication cost, you can always turn to circuits. And that's why I covered both sides of this use case.
But I think actually there's no limit on the ballot. This is just sorry.
Okay.
I don't really feel comfortable sharing, but like, are you limited ballot size, like in terms of the size of the ballot? Or not?
The parameter size do, yes, yes, they do limit, yeah.
So yeah, I could like yes.
You're convinced or you're not convinced? Okay. More questions?
Do these methods scale up? Let's suppose you don't care about smart card, you add a big prover on a big computer. I mean, this seems amazingly efficient. Does it scale up to large problems?
Yes, and the worst the worst that you have to put yourself up with is complex circuits. The trade-off that is yielded here, complex circuits start to yield or start to result in much more storage cost than what you would get with Plonky or pairing-based instantiations. So this fits into restricted environments because I selected a circuit, Poseidon pre-images, that can go to identify yourself, like identity use cases or voting. But of course, as you turn to more complex circuits, then you quickly see that the curve turns towards the more efficient generalized snark versions.
So it's a non-linear blow-up then. So it's super linear, the blow-up.
Yeah, at least, because of the strictly affine PCP, the bridge between normal PCP to SA PCP will make, not sure, but at least super linear, yes.
Okay, further questions? Yeah, if not, then let's thank Silur again.